Welcome. I'm Dr. Bryan,
And I'm Mary Claire.
and we are your hosts. We're happy to be here with you today. Today, we're going to be talking about how we get good tests.
Woo! We
Yeah.
love getting good tests.
Yeah, it's not easy, though. That's the problem. And these are real tests that are backed by real science. And sometimes people think that it ought to be something that's super simple, since it is very easy to take a test. But we sometimes forget that the environment in which we take that test is not always that easy.
I always say, like, if it was that easy, it probably wouldn't be good, you know?
That's right. That's
So,
right.
so yeah, looking forward to spreading the word on the best practices that we give our customers and our clients for taking a test. So, Bryan, I thought we'd kick it off by giving a little background, like to the recommendations that we're going to offer. To what end are we offering them? What's behind that? So, I'm going to kick it off with you. If you wouldn't
Okay.
mind kind of explaining what's actually happening with the technology when somebody's taking a test, such that the best practices are going to make more sense.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think we can even take one step further back and talk about first polygraph. So if you think about what lie detection has done in the past, the science behind lie detection in the polygraph, it's based really on physiological response. So if I wire you up, I'm really trying to see what happens when I ask you questions. And the things that we're looking for are your heart rate, how fast you're breathing, your respiration, your response times, all of these things. And the idea is that if you start to get nervous, then chances are you're not telling the truth. The problem with this, as everybody knows, is that this can be beat. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
you can control your heart rate. You can control your respiration. These are things that you have the ability, if you practice, that you can countermeasure against polygraph. These new technologies are looking at non-controllable responses that are autonomic. And with ocular motor deception, the technology that we use that was developed at the University of Utah, it's looking at what happens in your brain when you are processing the question based on how you have to think about it when you're lying versus when you're telling the truth. So the bottom line, the easy way to think about this is that when you lie, you're telling a story and you have to keep that story straight. And so you have to think about it harder. And as you think about it harder, it causes a cognitive load, and that cognitive load causes autonomic responses in your body, particularly in your eyes, but in other areas as well. And that's what we're monitoring. We're monitoring those responses that you cannot control. So that's the science behind what it is that we're trying to do. So then it stands to reason that we need to get the best view of those autonomic responses as we possibly can. So everything you would think about with respect to sound and lighting and video, audio, all of those things are going to matter.
So then that is super helpful. Every time we talk about it, even though I've known about this for a while, I keep learning more and more. That's the beauty of this. When somebody's actually taking the test, so with that science as the background, tell us a little bit about the test experience and what's actually happening with the phone, what it's capturing. Why are lights and view and sound so important?
Yeah, that's a great question too. It's just been recently that we have the technology that's been advanced far enough that we can get the right kinds of audio, video, quality pictures and sound that we need in order to do this test on a phone. So once the 4K cameras on the back of the phone came out, it became possible for us to use that camera in order to capture this information. So when you take an I Can Know test, and I know it's a little bit odd, but as you go through, you'll learn that we flip the phone upside down and backwards like this. Yep. So you get the back camera, and then we get an audio voice that reads you questions. And then as you're looking into the camera, you answer those questions, and the camera captures those responses on your eyes and your face that we use to determine whether somebody's being credible or deceptive.
So the test taker is going to say either true or false. You can also say yes or no. And as we're thinking about what to say, we've got to think about it either a little bit harder or a lot harder or not as hard at all. It's almost an automatic response. Depending on how hard we have to think about that answer, that's our eyes, as you said, are giving an uncontrollable, for lack of a better term or less scientific term, response.
Yeah.
that then the camera is capturing through these pictures. Is that correct?
That's correct. And one of the things that most people what they won't realize as they're taking the test is that we are sampling the facial recognition issues that we're looking at 5,000 times during that test. So in a 10 to 15 minute test, we're taking 5,000 pictures of the face and the eyes that we then upload to our system, and our AI and algorithmic computer back end then do all the analysis on those pictures to determine and to score that test.
Okay. And the last thing I think may or may not be relevant for this, when we score, and then we'll move on to the best practices. When we're scoring, we're comparing how their eye responds when asking a kind of baseline comparison question to the questions of relevance, correct?
Correct. And then at the same time, we're also capturing all of the audio in a stream. And so, most people realize that audio files and video files are big files. And so this puts a tremendous load on the phone. It's not a light touch, right? I mean, this is doing some serious data gathering, data acquisition, and scientific computations as you're doing this test. So it is a resource intensive application.
Which actually kind of leading us to the actual test experience and into the best practices. When you click on a test link and the app opens, the first thing the app does is it goes through a checklist, one of which is battery charge, I believe.
Yeah.
Because it takes a lot of effort for your phone to administer this test. We need to make sure the phone is appropriately charged.
Correct.
Okay, so let's get into what we recommend outside of what the app is going to recommend before a test initiates, or once you hit the test link, click on the test link. One of the things that we recommend has to do with background. And this is something we're highlighting even more and more, or more strongly with our clients. So we're recommending that there is as neutral as a background as possible when taking a test. So in fact, this wall, if I didn't have that eyeball right there, would be a pretty good
awesome
place. Yeah.
And in fact, my background would not be a good background for the test, right?
And why is that?
Well, because there's so many different colors and shapes, and there's lots of dark spots and places where the test could get confused with respect to what it's looking at. And in fact, if we get these kinds of backgrounds that I have, typically we won't get enough data quality to score the test. And because the test won't be able to really determine what is the face, what are the eyes, and get the right responses on those. Yours is much better, and that's what we ask people to look for: is a neutral, monochrome, something that is not just, it doesn't create a lot of variations that could confuse the test.
And really, what we're trying to get at is make sure that when the camera is capturing pictures, the camera's focused on the right focal point, which is the eye. And if there are other colors, especially dark spots, the camera could pick up on that dark spot as an eye as opposed to your actual eye. Is that correct?
Correct. And then it just won't score. And in that case, you just won't get an answer.
You have to retake a test.
Correct. Okay.
This actually leads to then when we talk about how important it is to get proper background, but we also want the proper placement of a phone.
Yes.
Sometimes we'll see folks where, in both in a video, in our the instructional video, and in the written out instructions that we offer of best practices, we want people to be ensure that the lens or the camera lens is in line with their eye. Now, the app's going to give you directions if it's too far away, if it's too close, too far to the right, to the left. However, sometimes people still hold it down here, and sometimes a nostril, correct? I mean, we run into that. Can be because it's dark, it confuses the camera a little bit. Not often, but camera placement's important for data quality as well.
Yeah. If you want the very best results, you do want to hold that so that as you flip this over, right, and you're holding this, that camera is pretty much even with your eyeball.
Yeah.
And if it's down here, these kinds of things here, you might get a test. It won't have as good a quality and it won't have as good of accuracy. And so you want to hold that up here as you're taking that test.
Yeah. Okay. The next one, that when it gets to atmosphere, if you will, noise.
Yeah.
I got one recently where the guy did score the test, and it turns out his kiddo was crying in the background. That's going to be tough.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about. I think it's pretty obvious, but why is sound important from being in a quiet, making sure you're in a quiet space?
Yeah. So when you're taking this test, we're listening very carefully for the true, the false, the yes, the no. You could use either one of those things. One of the challenges you get oftentimes is that when you'll turn a phone upside down, this mic is on the top of the phone. And sometimes people will hold it like this and they cover the mic.
Yeah.
And so you can't actually hear what they're saying. Or if you're in a room with a lot of other extraneous noise or noise outside the room, it's hard for the system to understand what it's listening for and what it picks up, because you're not typing anything. Everything is audio driven. So the computer, the phone is asking you the questions and you're responding to those questions. It has to be able to hear you.
The other thing as it relates to sound, we have to speak clearly enough too, in order for the data to match to score it. So speaking
Right.
clearly, speaking loudly. Sometimes people feel like they're speaking loudly, but unbeknownst to them, their Bluetooth is connected, and a stereo or a microphone in another part of the room or the house is trying to pick up on a sound that's not there. So the other thing we recommend is make sure your Bluetooth, or the Bluetooth button, so to speak, is off on your phone.
This is really important. When we first started talking, we talked about the resource intensity of this application. There's actually a number of things that you can do to help your phone, right? One is definitely turn off the Bluetooth, because that's going to be something that if you're connected to a different speaker, and we get this sometimes where people are like, I've been screaming at my phone and it can't hear me. Well, it's because it's connected to some Bluetooth someplace else and it can't hear you from that distance. But there are other things as well. Like, for example, oftentimes we'll have apps running in the background of our phone that are also hooked into our resources, whether it's our speakers, our microphones, whatever the case. You need to make sure that all of those apps are turned off, because they are taking up resources as well. And you want to make sure that nothing else is accessing those resources at the same time. So you want to make sure that all other apps are turned off. You want to make sure that your Bluetooth is turned off. And then you also want to make sure that your do not disturb is turned on, right?
Yeah.
That shouldn't be your airplane mode. You do need Wi-Fi. It needs to be able to upload the data as it collects it and after it collects it. But turn on your do not disturb so you don't get incoming phone calls or incoming texts as you're taking the test.
Because that will interrupt the test, and you might have to retake it. Correct.
It may not restart. I mean, one of the ways that people try to defeat this test is they'll take half of the test and then they'll stop and they want to think, then they want to restart the test. It doesn't allow you to do that. And you can't pick up a test and start it where you left off. So you couldn't be like, oh, okay, now that I know what that question is going to look like, I'm going to practice it and get it really down, and then I'm going to go back and retake it again. That's not the way that it works.
Also, you're still having to tell yourself the story in your head, even if it's subtle. That's what people.
Correct.
You can't control that.
That's right. It doesn't help you to practice. That's right. That's right.
No. If anything, it impacts that can swing one way, or that can swing, and actually you do worse.
That's correct. That's true.
So it's the assumption is incorrect. It's counterintuitive. Okay, lighting. Another thing we often get. Excuse me. Computer screens sitting right. I am in a horrible place to take a test. I have 2 computer screens and 2 windows right in front of me. We need good lighting, but tell us why my environment currently is a bad one.
Yeah, in fact, probably the most problematic is actually the window behind you. Because in the camera view, that bright light behind you reflects off of the front of the camera of your phone onto your eyes and face, which makes it difficult for us to get the data quality that we need. What we would want you to do is turn around so that the only thing that was in the camera view was your back wall. Yeah, that's right. And then anything there that would reduce reflection, you can see a light reflecting off that wall as well. If that's an overhead light, it's probably not as big a deal as if it were a side light.
It's a window.
Yeah, it's a window, exactly. So that window reflecting even off that wall creates reflections that are difficult. So what we would say there is point to that back wall, shutter all of your windows or close the curtains
Yep.
or close the blinds, right? Turn on your overhead lights.
Yep.
So that you've got good downward lighting, but not from the side or from a reflective source, would be the best test taking environment for lighting.
One of the things we're offering to partners now is actually these, this, how do we create the best environment then? Some of our partners are actually bringing clients into their office, some sort of a black background, if you will, a stand. If, our consumers out there, probably many of them don't have a phone stand likely, but if you have a phone stand, that also supports and helps it further increases the accuracy of the test.
Right.
So quiet space, dark, plain background, and a phone stand is really the most optimal situation for a test taking experience.
Yeah, we did some scientific testing, and this was really interesting where the scientists got a room with no external lighting or reflective sources, painted the walls flat black, had good overhead lighting. So it wasn't a dark room. It was just the walls they just had no reflective ability on the walls, and they used that as the background. And in that environment, they're getting almost 90% accuracy on this test, which is incredible, given the nature of the technology. Now, we know that none of our customers are going to get exactly those, completely optimal conditions, but you can get very close. Just like you said, if you have a solid colored wall that's not reflecting, you can close off all those reflective sources and have a good overhead source of light, then you can do very well. You get in the high 80s in terms of accuracy.
This is a tidge off topic, but it's like almost like a PSA. Well, before I say this, Bryan, any other it comes from a best practice and an environmental standpoint relative to what the phone is capturing and what we ask of our customers to have the best possible experience. It's for their own good. It's to help them. It doesn't necessarily impact us, but we care about creating a good experience for them. Anything else that you see in all of our interaction with customers that would be helpful to communicate?
Well, I'll just say one thing that, typically when a customer is trying to take a test, and, we understand the privacy nature of this and the sensitivity around the kinds of questions that people are asking. And sometimes they'll say, well, the best place for me to take this test is in a car because I'm by myself and it's enclosed and fairly quiet. Turns out that's a horrible place to take the test because there's so many windows and so many reflective sources.
And
it's
colors.
very hard to get good data, colors, et cetera. So it is a balance. We understand that. But if you can find that room that, you can get a good monochrome background, good overhead lighting, no reflections, and then you can really do those things we talked about on your phone, get rid of you turn your Bluetooth off, make sure it's on do not disturb, make sure all the other apps are turned off. If you can get a stand, that's the best. And so, look, these tests aren't cheap and they're real science. And so the better environment that we can put ourselves in to take the test, the more accurate they're going to be, the better results. And ultimately, our desire for our customers is to help them move forward with their lives, whatever that looks like for them. And the best test that we can get for them gives them the best opportunity to do that.
I think, and it's just plugging a previous episode that we did, another way to create the best possible experience is to ensure we have really effective questions. And that's our job, right?
Yeah, that's right.
We got to partner with our customers. They got to be willing to work with us. But when we get good questions together with good environment, good things can happen. The truth can be revealed.
That's exactly right. You get good answers.
Well, this was fun, Bryan. Any final comments?
No, I like what you just said there that, we're here to help our customers get the answers they want to find. And we recognize that, look, no lie detection technology is perfect. We understand that. And sometimes it's going to get the wrong answer. What we'd like to do is create an environment where we can get the right answer most often and make sure that, customers get what they need as they're trying to find the answers to the questions they have.
Perfectly said.
Fantastic. Well, this has been fun, Mary Claire. Thanks for doing this. We appreciate your time as well, and thank you for everybody who is listening today. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, we'd invite you to like us on Spotify or wherever else you get your podcasts. And until next time, we hope your search for truth is successful.
Take care.
Bye now.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Truth Quest. If you'd like to be a guest on our show or would like to customize a solution for yourself or your business, email us directly at answers@icanknow.com. Truth Quest is brought to you by the #1 truth verification technology available today. Visit us at icanknow.com to learn more and stay tuned for the next Truth Quest.